In the pre-dawn gloom of a Florida mansion, a sound tears through the silence. Not a gunshot. Something else first. A screaming electronic alarm. A violation of code. A warning that something inside this perfect, wealthy shell has been broken. Inside, 3 people are breathing. One is on the cold marble floor, bleeding out. The shower is still running. The water mixing with something darker, swirling down the drain. One is screaming. A raw, animal sound that has no words, only a name, repeated over and over into the echoing chaos. And one is quiet, listening, hearing the gurgle of a life ending, hearing the screams, hearing the relentless, mind-numbing wail of the alarm. When help arrives minutes later, they will find a scene of almost impossible contradiction. Brutal violence contained within stunning opulence. A man shot 9 times, yet a house so clean, so orderly. 2 people emerging from the nightmare, but no clear monster. Just a shattered mother and a dazed son, each pointing a trembling finger, not just at each other, but at the life they had all built together. The question for the police was simple: which one of you did this? But that was the wrong question. The right question, the deeper, more terrifying question, was this: what if, in this family, pulling the trigger was just the final, desperate act in a crime that had been committed slowly, over decades? What if the murderer wasn't just a person, but a shared history of love turned to resentment, of promises used as weapons, of a home that had long ago stopped being a sanctuary and had become, instead, a cage? This is the story of Lanny, Donna, and Radley Horwitz. It has all the pieces of a classic mystery: guns, money, a secret lover. But to stop there is to miss the truth. This isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's a sickness to be understood. A slow, quiet sickness where the symptoms were a divorce that didn't stick, a business deal between ex-spouses, and a collection of 24 guns scattered like toys in a multi-million-dollar dollhouse. By the end of this, you will hear the evidence. You will hear the lies that might be truths, and the truths that feel like lies. And you may come to a chilling conclusion, that in some families, the victim and the killer might have been doomed to play their parts from the very beginning. That the only real mystery is which one of them finally snapped under the weight of it all. Admiral's Cove, Jupiter, Florida. The name itself sounds like escape. A sanctuary of boat slips and polished luxury, where the only ripples on the water are from yachts, and the only alarms are set for sunset cocktails. This is where Lanny Horwitz built his kingdom. Not with a crown, but with concrete and ambition. A lawyer who never practiced, he'd cracked the code on easy money through real estate and retired a millionaire before he was 40. His castle was a sprawling, custom-built waterfront mansion. His queen, at least in the beginning, was Donna, his high school sweetheart, the mother of his only son, Radley. For decades, the picture was perfect. The family portrait, the success story. But inside the castle, the walls were slowly closing in. Think of the Horwitz home not as a house, but as a pressure cooker. A gleaming, stainless steel pot with the lid clamped tight. And over the years, 3 distinct ingredients were sealed inside, each one heating up, each one threatening to explode. The first ingredient, Lanny himself. The patriarch. To the outside world, charming, generous, the life of the party. But inside the walls, a different man took shape. A manipulator. A man who, according to those who knew the private rhythms of the house, ruled not with a shout, but with a calculated, psychological squeeze. He was the source of the pressure, the heat under the pot. The second ingredient, Donna, the heart of the home, once full of life and energy. But a heart can be bruised. Over the years, her light began to flicker under the constant, subtle pressure. There were affairs on both sides. Divorces, plural. They divorced and remarried in the same year. A dizzying dance of rupture and repair that revealed a desperate, toxic bond. Donna battled deep mental health struggles, attempts to end her own life. Her stability became fragile, a hair trigger. By 2011, she was a woman clinging to a single, fragile hope that she could move back in, loan Lanny a life-saving $200,000, and somehow, finally, piece their broken fairy tale back together. She was putting all the broken pieces of her hope back into the pressure cooker. The third ingredient, Radley, the son, the heir. His father's shadow was long and cold. While Lanny saw himself as a self-made king, Radley's attempts to build his own kingdom crumbled. His passion was guns. He opened a business, Jupiter Arms. But it was his father's advice to buy an illegal gun part online that put him on the radar of the ATF. That led to a felony conviction, a 5-month prison sentence, and the total collapse of his dreams. He claimed entrapment. He blamed his father. And he said when the federal agents came to arrest him, Lanny laughed. Humiliated, convicted, and unemployable, Radley moved back into the family home. He wasn't a man in his father's house. He was a ghost of his father's failures, simmering with a quiet, shameful rage. Now feel the heat. 26 guns in the house. Not in a safe. In drawers. Under beds. In closets. A private arsenal. Paranoia as decor. And just 10 houses down, the ghost who lived in plain sight. Francine. Lanny's business partner. His best friend. The woman he held hands with, kissed on the cheek, brought a dozen roses to at the airport. The woman who texted him at midnight. The constant, glowing presence on Lanny's phone, which was never far from his side. For Donna, trying to rekindle a decades-dead romance, Francine wasn't a neighbor. She was the living, breathing proof that her hope was a fantasy. The lid was on. The heat was on high. Lanny had Donna's money and her fragile hope. He had Radley, dependent and resentful, living under his roof. He had Francine, waiting in the wings. He controlled it all. All that was left to ask was not if the pressure cooker would explode, but when, and who would be left holding the pieces. The night before the explosion, the 3 ingredients were all in the pot. Lanny, the man who held all the cards, was about to play his final, most provocative one. He went to dinner with his son, Radley. Over burgers, he offered 2 statements that didn't just contradict each other. They tore the family's fragile reality in two. First, he mused that he always saw himself growing old with Donna, his high school sweetheart. A sentimental bone thrown to the past. Then, casually, he mentioned he was leaving the next day for a trip to North Carolina. With his business partner, Francine. He was packing his bags to leave with one woman, while telling the son of another that she was his forever. Back at the house, those suitcases sat in the master bedroom. For Donna, they weren't just luggage. They were a physical monument to her humiliation, a sign that her $200,000 had bought her nothing but a front-row seat to her own betrayal. In her diary, the loving nickname Lumbo had already been scratched out and replaced with 2 words, Mr. Meany. The last entry, weeks old, read simply, asterisk, another long day of lies. Asterisk. The stage was set. The pressure gauge was trembling in the red. Now, let's walk into the fog of that morning. September 30th, 2011. Just after 7 a.m. We have 3 stories from inside the house. 3 fractured realities. Only one can be physically true, but in the emotional landscape of the Horwitz family, they all felt true. He was in his room, earplugs in. The first thing he heard wasn't clear. Was it the pop-pop of gunfire? Or was it the shrieking security alarm? He pulled out an earplug. The world was a cacophony of noise. And then, another sound. A mechanical click-click-click. To a former gun dealer, that sound was as specific as a word. A hammer falling on an empty chamber. A dry fire. He peered out his door. He saw his mother, Donna, pacing in the living room, screaming and screaming my name, arms flailing. He saw, through a doorway, a shape on the floor in the master bathroom. He heard a sound from that shape, a god-awful, inhuman gurgle. He was scared, frozen. He asked his mother, "Did he attack you?" Her only reply, he said, was, "He was so awful. He was so awful." In his story, he is a witness. A son jolted from sleep into a nightmare, paralyzed by fear, watching his mother come unraveled at the scene of a tragedy. She never gave a formal statement. She never explained. Her story is told in the language of physics and physiology. It is told in the downward angles of 9 bullet wounds, suggesting a shooter standing over the victim. It is told in the permanent damage to her inner ear, A 48% loss of hearing in an instant, the kind of trauma that happens in an enclosed space, next to the violent percussion of gunfire. It is told in a single, small smear of blood on her bare foot, noticed only by her son, who handed her a napkin to wipe it away. It is told in the two guns, one found on the bathroom floor, one on the dresser. Both had been fired. One held a mixture of DNA, Lanny's, and a profile that could not exclude Donna Horwitz. Her story is one of devastating, transformative proximity. Her silence, according to the police, was the silence of guilt. But it could also be the silence of a mind shattered by sound, by sight, by the irreversible act of a lifetime's pressure finally finding its release. He was in the shower. The glass door was shut. The water was running. He stepped out, vulnerable, naked. The first shot shattered the glass. Or maybe the first shot found him, and he fell into it. Shards scattered like diamonds on the bloody floor. He was hit again, and again. He stumbled or crawled. His hand knocked a landline phone from the wall. Was he reaching for it? Was he trying to call for help? Or was it just a frantic, falling grasp? He was shot 9 times. The final shot, the medical examiner would note, was delivered at close range, upward, into the mouth. A contact wound. In his hand, when the security guard found him, was a gun. Empty. Was it a gesture of last-minute self-defense? A struggle for the weapon? Or was it placed there, a final, grotesque piece of staging? His story is one of utter violation. Not just of his body, but of his castle. The violence didn't come from a stranger breaking in. It came from within the sealed walls of his pressure cooker. 3 stories. 3 people. One is dead, his truth buried with him. One is silent, her truth locked behind trauma or guilt. One is talking, his truth wrapped in a fog of shock and self-preservation. At 7:03 a.m., the outside world arrived in the form of Luis Garcia, a security guard. He found Radley at the door, dazed, groggy, enclosed but seeming like he'd just crawled from bed. He found Donna, hysterical, sobbing, able to choke out only 4 words. "I think he's dead." The guard saw no blood on them, no visible injuries. He saw a mother consumed by emotion, and a son seemingly detached from it. He saw nothing that made him think they were involved. But he was looking for monsters. He wasn't looking at a tragedy that had been decades in the making. He was looking at the explosion, not at the cracked pot that made it inevitable. The police would come. They would see the guns, the bullets, the blood. They would initially think it was a suicide, a man found with a gun in his hand. That assumption lasted only until they rolled the body over and saw the brutal, overkill reality. A suicide is a simple story. This was not simple. This was a family story. And those are always the most complicated and the most deadly of all. The spark had flown. Now, the long, slow burn of justice, or what passed for it, was about to begin. With the family removed and the yellow tape up, the story moved from the realm of emotion into the realm of fact. The detectives now had to navigate the crime scene. But this was no ordinary maze of evidence. This was a labyrinth where every clue forked into 2 opposite paths, where every piece of data seemed to whisper 2 different names. Let's walk this labyrinth together. Let's look at what they found, and listen to the 2 stories each piece was desperate to tell. 2 handguns were used in the killing. One was found on the bathroom floor. The other sat neatly in its holster on the bedroom dresser. This speaks to chaos, to rage. One gun is emptied. Asterisk click, click, click asterisk. So the killer grabs another, close at hand, to finish the horrific task. It speaks to a personal fury, an intimate violence that needed to be complete. It fits the narrative of a scorned, unstable partner snapping. This speaks to calculation. 2 guns create confusion. They muddle ballistics. Was there 1 shooter or 2? For a son with gun expertise, or a hired professional, it could be a tactic, a deliberate act of misdirection. The DNA on the guns deepened the maze. The bathroom gun had a mixture of Lanny's DNA and 1 other contributor. Donna Horwitz could not be excluded. The dresser gun's results were inconclusive, a scientific shrug. Her DNA on the murder weapon. The simplest, most damning link. It was her home, her bathroom, her husband's gun. Of course her DNA might be on it. Its presence doesn't place her finger on the trigger at that moment. It only places her in her own life. Away from the horror of the bathroom, on the metal gate railing just inside the grand front door, was a small, smudged fingerprint in Lanny Horwitz's blood. This was the defense's holy grail. The hitman's stamp, a mysterious, unidentified DNA profile mixed with Lanny's blood. Someone else was in the house. Someone fled in a panic, leaving this bloody calling card on their way out. It was the proof that shattered the simple mother or son binary. This is the prosecution's counter. First responders rushed in. EMTs worked on the body. Security guards moved through the scene. In the early, chaotic minutes, could blood have been transferred on a glove, a piece of equipment, a sleeve? The unidentified DNA could belong to a paramedic whose profile wasn't in the system. The smudge wasn't a clue, it was accident. A red herring in a literal sense. This one, small mark became the black hole of the case. A point of infinite gravity where logic swirled and disappeared. The shots that killed Lanny Horwitz came from a downward angle. The science was clear on that. Donna Horwitz was a petite woman. Her son was taller. The defense would bring in experts to declare it scientifically impossible for someone of her height to create those angles. Therefore, the shooter had to be taller. Therefore, it had to be Radley. The prosecution had its own experts. A struggle is not a still photograph. A man is falling, stumbling, crouching. A shooter may be leaning over, angling around a shower door. In the violent choreography of a close-quarters killing, angles are fluid. The impossible becomes not only possible but likely. So, was it the cold math of geometry or the chaotic physics of a life-and-death struggle? The evidence gave no final answer. It only provided ammunition for a duel. No gunshot residue on Radley's hands. No blood-soaked clothing on Donna, just that single smudge on her foot. How does a person fire 2 guns 9 times and have no telltale specks of powder on them? How does a person stand in a bathroom painted in blood and emerge almost clean? It doesn't add up. It must mean they weren't the primary shooter. GSR is fragile. It can be washed off with a simple act like putting hands in pockets or clinging to a door frame. The lack of blood? Perhaps the shooter was shielded by the shower curtain, by Lanny's own body, by the simple, random luck of physics. The pajamas, collected later, were processed, but finding nothing conclusive isn't the same as finding proof of innocence. Here, the absence of evidence became its own kind of haunting presence. Stepping back from the labyrinth, a chilling pattern emerges. The physical evidence refused to tell a single, coherent story. For every signpost that seemed to point to Donna, there was a twist in the path that led directly to Radley. For every clue that hinted at a family member, a shadowy third figure seemed to flit just out of sight. This wasn't because the investigation was bungled. It was because the crime scene was a perfect reflection of the life lived within it. It was a house of mirrors. Every piece of evidence was a mirror, and what you saw in it depended on what you already believed about this family. If you believed Donna was a scorned, unstable woman, the evidence crystallized into a story of her rage. If you believed Radley was a resentful, manipulated son, the same evidence reshaped itself into a tale of his calculation. The facts were neutral, but families are not. And this family's pathology had seeped into the very walls, into the ballistic patterns, into the spatters of blood, making everything ambiguous. The detectives, and soon the jurors, would not just be judging evidence. They would be choosing a reflection. They would be deciding which version of this family's hell they found more believable. And in a house of mirrors, the truest horror is realizing that every reflection is, in some way, real. Before a single juror was chosen, before a single lawyer stood to give an opening statement, the true storyteller of this tragedy had already spoken. Her words were not recorded in a police interview room. They were not delivered under oath. They were etched in the private, bleeding ink of a diary. Donna Horwitz's diary is the ghost that haunted the entire trial. It is the unspoken transcript of the pressure cooker's final, screaming whistle. To read it is to walk the final, precipitous path of a mind breaking under the weight of a hope that had become a weapon. Months before the murder, the entries are buoyant, almost girlish. Lanny asked about $200,000 to keep both houses afloat and move back in and reconcile. Great day. Lanny loves me, and I love him, and I want to help. The $200,000. It was never just a loan. It was the price of admission back into her own life. The ransom for a shared future. She paid it with the faith of a true believer. But faith, under constant pressure, curdles into surveillance, then paranoia, then a certain, cold knowing. The entries turn. The affectionate Lumbo vanishes. In its place, Mr. Meany. A childish name for a profoundly adult cruelty. The words paint a chilling portrait of psychological erosion. Friend, and then it stops. The last entry is September 5th, weeks before the murder. Another long day of lies, of being Mr. Meany. I stayed home all day, very tired. It ends not with a bang, but with an exhaustion so deep it feels like a void. The prosecution would hold this diary aloft. They would call it the blueprint of a murder. The story was clear. The hopeful woman became the betrayed woman, who became the angry woman, who snapped when she saw the packed suitcases, the final, physical proof of her obsolescence. 10 shots. 9 hits. The last one, up close, in the mouth. The fury was in the ballistics. The motive was in the pages. But the defense would ask the jury to see something else. To see not a blueprint for murder, but a cry for help so loud it was silent. They would say, look at this mental decline. Look at this documented fragility. Is this the cold, calculated state of a person who plans an execution? Or is this the portrait of a woman being systematically destroyed? A woman who might have been incapable of the complex, violent act the prosecution described? They would argue the diary pointed not to her guilt, but to her victimhood. It proved she was being crushed. It didn't prove she was the one who finally snapped in a homicidal way. What if she snapped in a catatonic way? What if the true response to that level of torment was not to fight, but to freeze? To become the silent, shell-shocked woman the guards found? The diary created the ultimate courtroom paradox. The very document that most damningly revealed her motive also most powerfully revealed her profound instability. It proved she had a reason to kill. It also proved she was breaking apart. And in that crack between motive and capability, the defense would try to plant their flag. They would say, you see a woman falling to pieces. Now, look at the other person in the house. Look at the son. Radley Horwitz's motive was not written in a diary. It was etched in the permanent record of the state of Florida. It was a felony conviction. It was the laughing echo of a father as federal agents led his son away. It was a revoked gun license, a failed business, a life derailed and forced back into the shadow of the man who caused it. His motive was in a book titled Hitman, a technical manual for independent contractors, found in his possession years earlier. When asked if it was a manual for killing and getting away with it, he agreed. As opposed to killing somebody and getting caught, yes. His motive was in a $200,000 life insurance policy his father had tricked him into signing over to Francine. His motive was in the $500,000 and 2 houses he stood to inherit. His motive was not emotional. It was transactional, a ledger of insults and injuries, of stolen futures and public humiliations. It was the resentment of a prince who never got to be king, forever treated as the court jester. The prosecution saw Donna's motive as hot-blooded, a crime of passion. They framed Radley's as cold-blooded, a crime of profit and patricide. One was an explosion, the other, an execution. But what if the truth lay in a darker, more tangled place? What if, in the toxic ecosystem of that house, their motives weren't separate at all? What if they had, in some unspoken, terrible way, converged? Donna's world was ending in a slow, psychological torture. Radley's world had already ended in failure and disgrace. Both were trapped. Both were being drained, one of money and hope, the other of dignity and future, by the same man. The prosecution needed one clear killer. The defense needed one clear alternative. But life in the pressure cooker wasn't that clean. Hatred can be a shared language. Desperation can be a common currency. The desire for Lanny Horwitz to be gone might not have been a plotted conspiracy between mother and son. It might have been the very air they breathed. A silent, mutual understanding that their jailer was the source of all their pain. Then, one morning, the suitcases were packed. The final insult, standing zipped and ready in the bedroom. And in that moment, the two trapped, broken people in the house didn't need to conspire. They just needed to exist, side by side. At the exact moment the pressure finally blew the lid off. The ghost in the room wasn't just Donna's diary. It was the specter of this unthinkable possibility, that in a family this broken, guilt might not be a solitary burden, but a shared inheritance. A courtroom is not a machine for uncovering truth. It is a stage for constructing narratives. The side that tells the more compelling, more believable story wins. For the Horwitz case, there would be two stages, two performances, and the story would change, not because the facts did, but because the audience's ear for the tale had been subtly, permanently altered. The first trial in 2013 was a classic tragedy, painted in bold, primary colors. The prosecution presented a seamless, emotionally resonant story. Donna Horwitz, the betrayed wife. The woman who gave her money and her fractured heart for one last chance, only to be mocked by her husband's very public affair with the neighbor. The packed suitcases were the final, unforgivable prop in this drama of humiliation. What you have here, the prosecutor told the jury, is a woman scorned, love, hate, and obsession. It wasn't about money. It was about, you want to know what? You are not going to North Carolina. You are not going anywhere. And if I can't have you, no one else can. The image was potent, almost Shakespearean. A fatal, possessive love. 10 shots. 9 hits. The last one in the mouth, they argued, is the shot of an angry, angry woman. Donna's silence from the very first moment, her inability to answer the security guard, her deafness to the EMT's questions, was framed not as shock, but as the cold, hard silence of guilt. Her diary was the pre-written script. The ballistics and DNA were the proof of performance. The defense fought back with the alternate script, the calculating sun. They pointed to the bullet trajectories and the tall shooter. They waved the bloody, mysterious smudge like a flag, insisting it was the mark of the real killer, a hitman hired by Radley. They painted Radley as the true beneficiary, the one with the clearer, colder motive. But in Act 1, the prosecution's story was too clean, too familiar. It fit a mold we all recognize. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty. First-degree murder. The story of the scorned woman had carried the day. But a powerful legal ghost had been summoned in that first trial, Donna's right to remain silent. Her lawyers appealed. They argued that her silence in the immediate aftermath, used so effectively by the prosecution as evidence of her calm, guilty mind, was a violation of her constitutional rights. The Fifth Amendment isn't just about the right not to testify in court. It protects silence in the face of police questioning as well. The appeals court agreed. Her silence should never have been weaponized against her. It was a fundamental error. In 2017, the verdict was overturned. Donna Horwitz was granted a new trial. This was more than a legal technicality. It was a narrative earthquake. The most compelling piece of the prosecution's first story, the image of the coldly silent, composed killer, was now legally deemed unfair. It had to be removed from the script. The ghost in the room had been given a voice, and it said, "You cannot judge me by what I did not say." The second trial in 2018 was a different play entirely. With this silence as guilt, theme forbidden, the story became murkier, grayer. The same evidence was presented, but now it seemed softer at the edges. Without the pillar of her stoic guilt, Donna Horwitz could be seen anew, not as a fury, but as a ruin. The diary now read less like a blueprint and more like a medical chart of a breakdown. The 48% hearing loss wasn't a detail. It was the signature of a trauma victim. The defense doubled down on Radley and the phantom hitman. The prosecution could no longer point to her calm silence. They had to rely solely on the violent, bloody chaos of the act itself. This time, the jury did not see a clear story. They saw the labyrinth. They saw the forking paths. After 3 hours of deliberation, they sent a note to the judge. They were hopelessly deadlocked. 6 to convict. 6 to acquit. This was the true climax of the entire saga. Not a verdict, but a perfect, agonizing stalemate. It was the mathematical expression of reasonable doubt. It was the jury becoming a mirror of the case itself, split, confused, and utterly trapped between two impossible truths. The judge, facing a mistrial, did something unusual. He told them to stop, to go home, to sleep on it, to return in the morning with fresh minds. What happened in those homes, on those pillows, is the deepest mystery of the entire case. What personal thoughts, what whispered conversations, what midnight reckonings shifted the scales? The next morning, clarity came. A unanimous verdict. Guilty, but not of first-degree murder. The change in degree was everything. First-degree murder requires premeditation, a conscious, planned decision to kill. The story of a woman who saw the suitcases and formed the intent to execute her husband. Second-degree murder is an intentional killing without premeditation. It is the act of snapping, of unraveling in a moment of extreme passion or disturbance. The jury in Act 2 had rejected the clean, scorned woman narrative. They could not believe she planned it. But looking at the evidence, looking at the two people in the house, they could not believe she was innocent. So they found a middle, messy ground. They believed she did it, but in a way that acknowledged the pressure cooker. They convicted her not of plotting a tragedy, but of collapsing under its weight. One holdout juror later explained the shift. I don't really believe I caved in my conscience, and my gut said it had to be her. Common sense in the end is what finally swayed me. Common sense. The final, fragile tool when logic and evidence lead only to a maze. Common sense said, in a house with two people, one is dead. The stories don't add up. Someone must be guilty. And the mother, the one with the diary, the one whose heart was breaking in ink, seemed the likelier source of the explosion. It was no longer a story of hate. It was a story of a crack that became a chasm. At age 70, Donna Horwitz was sentenced to 32 years in prison. She would likely die there. The story the law finally settled on was not one of epic rage, but of a slow, terrible unraveling that ended in a single, catastrophic moment. The stage went dark, but the echoes of the performance, the one that changed between acts, would linger forever, asking the hardest question of all. Did they find the truth? Or did they just find a story they could finally live with? A prison cell is the ultimate silence. For Donna Horwitz, the woman whose silence was once used to condemn her, it became her permanent residence. The bag lady she once feared becoming now lived in a state-issued uniform, her world reduced to a concrete rectangle, far from the waterfront views and marble floors of Admiral's Cove. The sentence of 32 years was less a punishment than a life sentence with an expiration date she would unlikely see. Radley Horwitz left the country. He moved abroad, seeking geography as an antidote to history. He spoke of having less hatred for his father, of holding no anger toward his mother. But these are the statements of a survivor standing in the ashes. They speak of exhaustion, not peace. He is forever the man who accused his mother of killing his father, and whom his mother's defenders accused of the same. He inherited the estate, the money, the homes, the physical remnants of the kingdom. But he can never inherit a clean story. He is the last keeper of a ruin. Francine, the best friend, the ghost next door, remained in Admiral's Cove, 10 houses down from a home forever stained. Does she still look at her phone, expecting a midnight text that will never come? Does she pass the Horwitz gate, a place now owned by the son who might blame her for it all? She is a living reminder of the love that wasn't, but was real enough to help destroy what was. And Lanny? The king, the manipulator, the center of the pressure cooker. In death, he achieved a final, grim control. His killing bound his family together in a perpetual, agonizing knot of accusation and guilt. He is the void at the center of it all. This is where most true crime tales end. With a verdict, with sentences, with a tally of wins and losses. But the story of the Horwitz family resists that clean conclusion. Because it was never a story about solving a murder. It was about understanding a collapse. We looked for a monster in the bathroom that morning. But what if the monster wasn't a person? What if it was the dynamic itself? The slow, corrosive recipe of one man's narcissistic control one woman's desperate dependency, and one son's emasculated resentment, all sealed for decades in a gilded cage. The gun was just the tool. The real weapon was the unspoken family rule, that love was transactional, that loyalty was leverage, and that escape was impossible. Donna's diary wasn't a murder plot. It was a weather vane spinning in the hurricane of that dynamic. Radley's gun manual and felony weren't a blueprint, but the symptoms of a man trying and failing to find power in a world where his father held it all. When the jury convicted Donna of second-degree murder, they did something profound. They didn't affirm a premeditated evil. They acknowledged an unraveling. They said, in the language of the law, this was not planned in cold blood. This was the catastrophic failure of a system under too much strain. It is the only verdict that makes emotional sense. Because in the end, this case leaves us with two unbearable truths. A mother is in prison for killing the father of her child. A son lives with the knowledge that his mother will die in prison, convicted of a murder he told the world she did not commit. There is no winner. There is no closure. There is only the enduring echo of a question that has no good answer. In a family this broken, where does the guilt truly lie? With the one who pulled the trigger? With the one who spent a lifetime loading the gun? Or with the terrible, shared chemistry that made the explosion inevitable? The security alarm that shattered the quiet of Admiral's Cove that autumn morning wasn't triggered by breaking glass. It was triggered by a family finally shattering. And long after the alarm was silenced, the echoes of that breakage remain, asking us not who, but how. How do we keep the people we love from becoming the people we fear? How do we prevent the place we call home from becoming a pressure cooker? There are no easy verdicts for those questions. Only the quiet, urgent work of listening for the first, faint sound of glass beginning to strain.